To the channel. Today I'm talking about Sarajevo, A Beginner's Guide by Ozren Kebo. And I've had actually, interestingly, a chance to interact with the author a little bit on Twitter. I sometimes post quotes from books that I've read, and he actually saw that I posted from the book and just thanked me for sharing some of the quotes. But I said, well, thank you, for writing this book. So the subtitle is A Beginner's Guide, and I think it's a wonderful subtitle. And this is part of my larger um, travel through reading series in which you are understanding more of a given location, not only by visiting it, but by reading about things, either while we're there or before. I started reading this book right before I got to Sarajevo and continued it while I was in Sarajevo, and I think I finished it just as I crossed the border into Montenegro. But a wonderful book in many ways. I was actually gifted this book by a Bosniak back in 2018 who was visiting Paris, and in testament to the fact that we read books at the right time, I finally read it in 2023 and held this book for 5 years and didn't read it before. And I think part of that is a book like this makes more sense in the location. I think part of the challenge of reading about the wars, I should say, and how many of them in the Balkans is how little they make sense in any way. I think they still will take processes of understanding once you arrive, but out of context if you haven't ever been there. That's why I always tell people that I learned about communism in school in America, but I didn't really understand it until I saw abandoned factories and ugly architecture in Eastern Europe. That really brought home the realities of it. Until then, it's just intellectual. So it's the same thing. I could read about a book. I could read about a war through a book, but until I go and meet people, until I go in and touch the concrete and exist in the place where a war was, I won't be able to get to that next level of understanding. And even there, I think, as he notes, it's just the beginning. I don't pretend to be some great authority on the Balkan Wars now. In fact, I feel like I feel the inadequacy of how much I don't know because I've taken the time to learn a little bit. So Cabo himself gives us a wonderful firsthand account of the siege. I'll read just the beginning of the text, the beginning of the beginning. So just here, it says, "A chronicle of Sarajevo, describing and celebrating its magic past, its bitter fate, and its bright future, as carefully investigated, considered, and established by one Ozren Kebo from Mostar. A truly pleasant and generally beneficial exercise. Read and remember." So, what does the book do? We have insights into what it's like to be in a besieged city. How does it affect you? How does it affect those around you? How does it define you, both then and after? Um, and this was a wonderful complement to my tour guide, who I took a couple walking tours with in Sarajevo, and she was about 7 or 8 during the siege, and to ask her questions about things that Ozren talks about. In addition to memories of the siege, we have political commentary on the Balkans in general. We have photos. Um, Here we can see some of the smoke there. We've got some wonderful photos. We have cultural insights. We move backwards and forwards in time, and we get those cultural insights right next to political realities of the present moment. And I think one of the challenges is when you walk around Sarajevo today, everything seems quite quote unquote normal. Things are peaceful, streets are full of smiling people, there's wonderful food to eat and people to talk to, showing that general Balkan hospitality of how they're going to outdo each other in taking care of you. And you actually need a guide to point out to you, oh, by the way, you know where this mall is that we are now? This used to be called Sniper's Alley. Or you see this giant can of meat that's marked from the European Union. Okay, well, this is kind of a joke, but kind of a tribute. Wouldn't necessarily make sense to us. And so this is one of the reasons why I think a local guide gives you so much important context for everything that's around you because you can see things as a tourist and not really understand. And so a book like this, I think, is a good beginning and then a guide to help contextualize some of what's brought up here. So I'm going to read a few things from the text, and as the book does, I'm going to move between different subjects and different ideas. But it's just to give you a taste and to encourage you. I think part of why I'm so excited about this book is because we can't assume that all books that deal with this that are firsthand accounts are translated into English. They're probably likely in Bosno-Serbo-Croat. Remember that this is a language in which people try to weaponize the differences in these dialects against each other, but these people are mutually intelligible to each other. And I think there's a great sort of point and a story there that they're more alike than they are different, although they like to highlight their differences for better or for worse. I don't want to get involved in that. So this part that I'm going to read from is about a mother who calls for a child because at the end of the day, kids would go to play. Now, keep in mind, this is a siege. So the kids have to be smart enough to be dodging bullets or not to be going around places where they're going to be exposed. But at some point, parents call and the children come home. But one child is not returning. Her voice tells all. If you know how to listen, her calls reveal a mother slowly realizing the truth about her dead child. She wants to be calm, not for the sake of the people around her, but for her own sake. She does not allow feelings to overwhelm her, and she calls out her little girl's name with an illusion of a calm voice. The illusion vanishes with the fifth unanswered call, and she gives in to despair. She is no longer calling, she is screaming. She is calling out, but Jnana does not hear her. Jnana is on the ground in the yard, motionless, brutally deaf to her mother's calls. Death is a state with no sounds. Her body is no longer a body, there is no life in it. It is just an illusion of a child who existed in Sarajevo until a few moments ago, and whose only fault in life was that, in terms of geography, she lived 12 kilometers from Pale, and that in terms of history she lived in the age of Radovan Karadzic. Right there at the place where geography and history collide, where a child and a mortar launcher collide, where coordinates and shells meet, where illusion and fate meet, where Boutros Ghali and David Owen, Russia and France, Britain and Greece, NATO and safe havens meet, that is where our children get killed. Not going to offer too much commentary on that one. This was a fascinating point about the idea of trying to maintain cleanliness when the water wasn't reliably on, nor was electricity. And I thought just a very poignant short paragraph headlined Cleanliness. Many people died while doing their laundry on the Miyaka River, hit by a sniper or a piece of shrapnel. People here are tidy and pay great importance to cleanliness. There is one who is not big on tidiness as he sees it as a lack of individuality and he wonders, what's more important, to be clean and dead or alive and filthy? Still, the clean ones outnumber the filthy ones among the living. For them, hygiene is a connection with civilization. That is why they insisted on washing so frantically. And it is the Miljaka River that we should thank for seeing clean people in the street, in t-shirts washed, though not ironed. Another wonderful reminder, being able to take a lesson from the war and applying it to life right now. The ideal of necessity against the ideal of superfluity. In peace, some of my ideas had no adequate arguments in their favor. War provided me with such arguments. What we used to laugh about has now become so logical, so reasonable, and so justified. Only in war we realized that our lives had been reduced to purchasing and amassing things. Our flats were displays of unique clutter. Clutter is the collective name for unnecessary things that find their way into our flats. 90% of all items in each flat are simply unnecessary. I think all of us could do with a reminder about what it is that we keep and what is necessary. And I say that even with, you can see some of my quote unquote clutter around that. Hopefully I've chosen that clutter intentionally and that it means something to me and that hopefully is something that I actually care about. And finally, I think an encouragement for from me to you, using the author's words, to not let this book be the beginning and end of a study about a particular region, but let it be, as the book suggests, a beginner's guide. The entire war, all that we've been through, has been reduced to a few images, an odd mortar round, a bit of hunger, a few art exhibitions, a few water queues, a few massacres, and that's that. So I will put a link to the book in the description below if you'd like to support my channel and also read your first author from Herzegovina, Mostars in Herzegovina. So from that area. And if you like the video, hit like, hit subscribe. Please forward it to people who you know might be interested in the Balkan Wars or in this region. Hopefully, this might encourage them to read a wonderful book as well from a thoughtful author who is active on Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it these days. And you can interact with him as well, ask him questions. I think he'd be open to answering your questions. If you'd really like to support my work, as always, feel free to hit subscribe or use my Amazon wish list to buy a book that I have on there, and by so doing, basically ask me to review it. That's another way in which you can get a book reviewed that you'd like, and I can get a gift from you. So please consider all those options, and until next time, enjoy your reading.